Hello everybody, my name is Matthias. In the next couple of minutes before the lunch break, I will talk about the latest research concerning secure portable storage devices. And as the title of my talk gives it away, there's also a security update included. Yeah, so I work for a German IT security company, and I think that's all you need to know for the moment. And I also have a history with encrypted portable storage devices. That goes back to 2009, actually. So that was the first time I hacked some of those devices by different manufacturers, like SanDisk, Kingston, and also Verbatim. I also gave my first talk about this topic in 2009 at the Chaos Communication Congress, and had some other devices tested. 2011, could hack them. And the last time I talked about this topic was 3 years ago, in 2022, and what I'm presenting today is a follow-up research, and yeah, I wouldn't be here if I wasn't successful in one way or another. Yeah, and this topic is also relevant, or maybe relevant to some of us, depending on in which sector you're working, and if you're working in the European Union, because some people can also regulate cybersecurity. And cybersecurity also affects secure encrypted portable storage devices and data encryption in general, where you have to ensure that your data at rest, in transit, or in use is always secure. So the main focus of my talk will be a security update that was released in July 2022, after I have talked about several other security issues and that I've reported to different manufacturers. And the main manufacturer I will be talking about today will be Verbatim. So this is a short recap. That was my knowledge at the end of 2022, when different security vulnerabilities that I have reported back then were patched or should have been patched using a security update. I already knew back then that not all security vulnerabilities were fixed. So the encryption algorithm was changed from AES AES electronic codebook to AES XTS. The immutable root of trust was not fixed. It's still an open problem and was back then. Then there was a possibility to perform offline brute force attacks against different devices, and back then I was not able to repeat this brute force attack after the security update was applied. But this was the focus of my research at the beginning of this year, and that's what I will mainly talk about. And another security issue concerning the lockout security mechanism of some of the devices also didn't work back then, and they still don't work after the security update now. Yeah, so my motivation was mainly curiosity. I had a gut feeling that it is feasible to still perform brute force attacks when analyzing the updated devices. And I also had some requests by different people. Is this now secure or is it not secure? And I just couldn't tell if it was possible. Yeah, and I'm always also motivated by the immutable laws of security by Microsoft. I don't know if some of you also know these. These are the old ones, and especially the law number 3. So if a bad actor has unrestricted physical access to your computer, it's not your computer anymore. And those portable storage devices are nothing else than a small computer. But I have to admit, I cannot own every computer that I have unrestricted physical access to, so that's kind of a challenge that I wanted to test my skills. So what you can see here, those are the devices I mainly tested and I will talk about today. And the first one on the left, the smallest one, this will be the example that I will use during this talk. And a short introduction concerning the used technology. What is a portable storage device and what components does is it made of? It's mainly made of those components that you can see here on the slide. There's an NAND flash memory, there's a memory controller, a USB bridge controller, and user input device. depending on the type of the device, for example, a keypad controller, or if you have a portable storage device that uses biometric authentication, there can be a fingerprint sensor controller. And in some cases, there's also a spy flash memory chip that contains the actual firmware. And the portable storage devices I had a look at all had AES hardware encryption with a specific AES engine incorporated in the specific microcontroller. And the user data was encrypted, with a disk encryption key. The disk encryption key is encrypted with a key encryption key, and the key encryption key is derived from the user input during user authentication. So in our example, it is a passcode that the user has to enter on a keypad, and then he can access the protected encrypted data. On this slide, you can see previous research of other researchers and also my own. So this is not a new topic. It started at least way back in 2007, and these are just references that I have used for my own research and where I learned a lot about doing this kind of analysis of those devices. Here you can see the desired security properties that at least I want to have for a secure portable storage device. Most of them are actually quite obvious. So what I want to have is all user data is securely encrypted so that it's impossible to infer any information about the plain text by looking at the ciphertext. So some of the devices I had a look at in 2022, they had a security issue because they used AES ECB, so electronic codebook mode, and there it was possible to infer information only by looking at the plain text at what the ciphertext at what the plain text was. So that is a property you don't want to have in a secure device. Then you also want to have only authorized users to have access to stored data. It's also quite obvious. And this user authentication that is implemented should not be bypassable. It's also a good idea to have the user authentication attempts to be limited. Otherwise, every combination that is possible can be tried in sequence, and then finally an attacker will gain unauthorized access to the device. So there are lockout mechanisms in place. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. Device integrity is also an important feature that I at least want to have, so mainly concerning the behavior of the device. For example, when there is firmware in place that can be accessed by attackers. So when there's a spy flash memory chip, like in some of those devices, it should not be possible to easily replace or modify the firmware of the device and make it function in a different way. So there should be also security controls, like cryptographic measures that prevent this kind of attack. And it should also be very expensive, at least, to perform so-called offline brute force attacks, requiring special know-how, special equipment. So the test methodology I have used, and I think everybody uses that has a look at this kind of devices, is having a look at the hardware, having a look at the firmware, and if there's also software involved, also doing this. So in this research project, I actually did some patch diffing, so I only had a brief look at the hardware, but the hardware couldn't change because I already possessed it and only applied a security update. So the main focus was on firmware, and the device I have tested, they have no Windows, Mac, or Linux software they are used with, so they are hardware-only devices. So the firmware was the interesting part. And concerning attack surface and attack scenarios, you have to have physical access to attack a physical device. Like in this case, you cannot do it via the internet. So that's a constraint for those attacks. And then you can also differentiate on the kinds of attacks that are performed. So when does an attacker have access to the device? There you can distinguish two different points in time. Before a legitimate user actually uses the device, for example, in a supply chain attack, is it possible due to missing integrity checks to modify a device and then give it to a legitimate user and then afterwards profit from the modification. Or, that's the more common case, I think, after a legitimate user has already used such a device. So, for example, in the lost or stolen device scenario. And yeah, a variation of the stolen or lost device scenario is if I only have temporary access to the physical device. For example, if I have access for 2 minutes, am I able to gain unauthorized access to secure data or not? And then just put the device back, and the legitimate owner doesn't even recognize that his device was in the hands of a bad actor. Yeah, and as mentioned before, the example device I want to present today is this one here, the keypad secure. It has AES 256-bit hardware encryption, a built-in keypad. As you can see here, it supports passcodes from the length 5 to 12 digits. And yeah, it does not store the password on the computer itself, on the host machine, and also not in volatile memory. It's all processed internally, so it's a small computer by its own means. Here you can see the hardware design of this chip with the components I have mentioned before. So on the left, we have a typical flash memory drive chip. Then we have a memory controller for this chip and a USB to SATA bridge because this device is a USB device. And on the other side of the PCB, we have the push buttons for the keypad, and we have a keypad controller, and a SPI flash memory chip, which contains the firmware of the device. And yeah, that's an interesting hardware design that makes it possible for me as an attacker to get a foot in the door for performing some kinds of attacks and analysis. And what you can see here is the content of the security update released in 2022. What I got here was then access to Windows software that is able to also flash software on the USB flash drive. Before, I always did it with a SPI flash memory programmer, but now it's also possible to use the official tooling, sometimes in a simpler way. So, I applied the update to my test devices I still had from 2022. And at first, I had a look at the included SSD drive in M.2 form factor. And what I could see now is that there are no obvious patterns, like before, that would indicate that an insecure type of AES encryption like ECB is used in this case. So when eyeballing this output, everything just looked good to me. Next, I did a protocol analysis, meaning I checked the communication between the two chips that we've seen before on the PCBs, namely the keypad controller and the USB to SATA bridge controller. Because when typing in the passcode on those devices, they are sent via SPI communication from the keypad controller to the USB SATA controller. And this user input, as we've learned previously, is then used to derive the key encryption key that is required to decrypt the data encryption key. And I just want to see if the security update, which contained a new firmware, changed anything concerning this protocol between the keypad controller and the USB to SATA bridge controller. But I was relieved because it was still the same as 3 years ago, so no change here, which was good for my analysis time. So here just to show a recap of the protocol that was or is still used on those devices. They support different kinds of commands. There's a specific command format that I've reverse engineered previously. And there's also an unlock command, and that's an interesting one for an attacker like me. What is also important about this protocol and the unlock format, you have to understand it to actually perform or try to perform brute force attacks because it's relevant for the key derivation. So everything that happens here in this protocol has to be understood to performance or to create an attacking tool. Yeah, and one of the key takeaways from the previous research was that a specific integer hash function is used that always groups 4 bytes together and hashes them, and this is part of the key derivation. So after the protocol analysis, I performed the more time-consuming part, namely the firmware analysis. So as mentioned before, the content of the SPI flash memory chip was the firmware of the used USB to SATA bridge controller. In my case, this was a Initio ENIAC 3637 chip. And the first difference I spotted was that now the firmware itself was encrypted. So previously, I could just dump the SPI flash memory chip, load it in DORA, for example, and look at the disassembly. Now I could also do this, but it was at least partially encrypted. I also did a research concerning the data sheets for this Initio controller, but still couldn't find them. So it's literally still a black box for me, and all the information I have is from previous research and observations I did when testing and probing this device. So what you can see here is hex output where is illustrated that the entry point of this firmware is not encrypted. That looks good as unencrypted R compact code in this case. And at some point, it started to look, not so much as plain R compact code. And this is where the encryption came in. Yeah, so the first step was to have a look at how is this encryption working and how is the actual code decrypted during runtime. So here we have the entry point, then we follow the code, and then we now go through step by step through everything. No, I'm just kidding, I will make it short. It's just 2 simple loops and an exclusive OR operation with 2 different 1-byte keys. So when you have a look at it as pseudocode, it's just as easy as that. And when you just know, oh, it's 2 simple loops about 2 memory ranges with 2 static keys, I was able to create an unencrypted firmware version, and that I could then further analyze. Yeah, and also as mentioned previously, this root of trust security issue is still not fixed and also cannot be fixed with its hardware design issues. So I was able to flash arbitrarily modified firmware on this chip and then test my own device with my own firmware to see if I can get any advantage out of this. Yeah, and being able to modify the firmware was very important because I had to find out how the hardware AES engine is now initialized with the new parameters and the new AES encryption mode, and how the key derivation works, and also how a successful decryption is working within the device and the information it has access to. Yeah, and I was still able to write R compact code with using GCC toolchains that were already available, and then analyze this code at runtime. Yeah, but this was the time-consuming part of this research. And what I try to do is find the device unlock function again, find the initializing AES engine function again in the new firmware, and also finding the place where AES keys are set. Then it was also important for me to being able to exfiltrate random access memory from this device. And I used the same way as I did a couple of years ago. I used a serial peripheral bus. Because as mentioned earlier, when doing the protocol analysis, there is SPI communication involved between the keypad controller and the memory USB to SATA bridge controller. So there has to be some functions for SPI communication, and I just found the SPI communication code and reused this one in my own very simple RAM dumping code that I will just have here on the slide. So this is the minimalistic version that I've used, and this can simply be compiled with a GCC toolchain and then injected in the decrypted firmware at specific places, and then I'm able to dump memory during runtime, and observe at different points in time of the code execution of the firmware what is actually happening with the data in memory. Yeah, and by setting different passcodes on the device, so reinitializing the device over and over again, I just spotted that there is still a specific special block in use where authentication information is stored in an encrypted way. So yeah, that is what the firmware analysis showed, that the encrypted disk encryption key is stored on the device itself in a special block that can be only accessed by the USB to SATA bridge and is usually, or is during normal operation, not used by the stick itself. And what the security update did, it is changed the AES ECB mode to AES XTS mode. But the problem is AES XTS can be configured or parameterized in different ways, and that's what I also had to figure out during the research, how it actually works after the security update. And in my case, it is a 32-byte payload, or there is a 32-byte payload that is sent from the keyboard controller to the USB to SATA bridge. And this payload is not used as is, it is sent via the bus, but it is split into halves, as you can see here, and then the byte order is reversed. So this was some trial and error, again, to finding out how the user input is involved in the derivating the key encryption key. And yeah, as this information or the encrypted data encryption key is stored on the disk, and I'm able to reproduce how the user input is involved in this process, it is possible to perform offline brute force attacks. So the requirements for this kind of attack are all there. And another good thing is that the passcode space is limited by the firmware, ranging from 5 to 12 digits, which is quite a small search space for performing brute force attacks. Yeah, so on this slide here are just some information about AES XTX. So XTS is a special encryption mode available also for use with AES. It's XOR encrypt XOR with a tweak. That's what it's about. There's a standard for it, and it's a recommended encryption mode for disk encryption. And in the case of the device I have analyzed, there are two key halves. The first key half is derived from the passcode, the user input, and the second key half, it turned out, was just a static byte sequence. Yeah, and this byte sequence is also the same for different devices, which is very good for me. So I didn't have to figure out how the other half of the key is generated, because it's static. Yeah, and now I hope I can also show a small live demo, if the demo gods are with me. So what I have here is a partly disassembled keypad secure stick. And the interesting part is that you can, due to hardware design, simply remove the actual storage device. So that's the NAND flash memory and the memory controller, and it's an M.2 SSD. So here I have a part of a other SSD enclosure, and I will just put this device in here. And let's see if my device also detects it. Yeah. And what I've written based on my research results, or what I've extended actually, was this VKS cracker, I've called it back then, even if it's also able to not only crack the keypad secure, but also other devices, as you can see here. And I've extended the functionality of the software tool to also support the security update with the introduced AES XTS encryption in this case. So here I have a keypad secure with 64 gigabytes of memory. That's the one here. That's the model number. And now let's see if I say I want the target number 7, and I have now attached the external SSD enclosure with the SSD from the device. Yeah, we can see that it didn't take that long on my laptop with 22 cores to at least crack a 8-digit passcode. So yeah, a little more than 8 seconds. And I can also directly extract the disk encryption key, of course, if I have access to the correct key encryption key. And for forensic purposes, I could now write another tool and directly mount this encrypted SSD on my Linux system, for example, if I would be interested in it. Yeah, so how this brute force attack works, it's not very special. You can see here, it's just a giant loop. There is this key derivation functionality that uses this hash function that I've already explained in my last research. And the change I did here was simply changing the AES encryption mode. And I'm also doing some other tricks right now, or heuristics, because I haven't figured out everything, how the firmware works and how it determines when something was successfully decrypted. So it's currently slower than it has to be honest with you. So it tests several positions of this magic sector where the authentication information is stored encryptedly, tries to decrypt it, and then checks for specific patterns. One of the patterns is it has to have a CRC16 checksum at the end. So if this does not match with the 510 bytes of plain text I have decrypted previously, this was not the correct key, obviously. And for determining if the decryption was correct, I have several patterns to test against. The first one is concerning boot sectors. So I will test the first sector of my disk and see if I get a correct master boot record or GUID partition table record. So they have also specific patterns I can test for. And if there is no master boot record or GPT sector, then I just check if there are just 0 bytes. Because if I have a completely uninitialized drive, that may be 0 bytes. So yeah, there are some heuristics here in place because I was a little bit lazy after I got a working solution that works for me. Yeah, what else? The tweak that is used for the encryption mode is simply the number of the magic sector. So that is also something you have to find out, but here it was by trial and error, simply using the sector number. Yeah, I already talked about the heuristic. I use CRC. I use specific patterns to detect a potential successful decryption. And this is due to the offset of the data encryption key is varying. And I haven't figured out this mechanism, but it's also not required to successfully attack those devices, fortunately for me. Yeah, so now my updated insights are that also this security issue that was reported 3 years ago is definitely not fixed with the security update, but you have to modify the actual brute force attack method. Yeah, but now you can access the secure encrypted data again. And this security issue not only affects the one device I've showed here, the keypad secure, but also other similar devices, so the store and go secure portable SSD and the HDD version. Yeah. And yeah, concerning feedback from the manufacturer, in this case Verbatim, I got none. So I've reported those security issues at the beginning of 2025, so this year. In the course of our responsible disclosure process, but didn't receive any feedback. And another thing I've noticed is during my research, I had access to different Verbatim keypad secure devices. And I was surprised when I opened them up because they had different hardware designs. And then I realized, oh, there were different build dates. So I had one device from 2019, and it had a different microcontroller and a different hardware design. Then the devices I bought back in 2021 for my research in 2022, they had also different hardware design. And then I also bought new devices at the beginning of this year. They were made in 2024, according to a quality assurance sticker inside, which had also another hardware design. So under the same product and model name, actually 3 different devices are sold or have been sold, which is also very interesting, and also problematic concerning the approving of such devices. So when you're in a company or a government agency, you usually don't have bring your own device policy for everything, but you're only allowed to use specific kind of devices that have to be approved previously. So when you now buy one of those devices with a specific model number, do a security test, get a grant for the approved device that you can use it now, and later on your purchase department buys another device, you cannot be sure that you actually have the same device. So that's quite problematic, I think, in this case. Yeah, and here's an example. So that's the new design. It has a different USB to SATA bridge controller. It has a different SPI flash memory chip. And it also has a different keypad controller. So all the things are different and have to be reassessed again and tested again. And in my journey of receiving data sheets, or at least, not only data sheets, but also programming manuals for those literally black boxes for me, I also contacted some vendors, and some of them sent me PDF documents, but not the one I actually wanted with technical information, but with roadmaps like this. But it was also interesting to see that different types of initial chips were already planned a couple of years ago back and to be used in different kinds of secure portable storage devices in this case. Yeah, and here just some sheets, and here's a brief summary. So a 2019 sample device has a different microcontroller as mentioned before. It's ARC 600 CPU internally. The ones I have analyzed also have ARC 600 from 2021, and now they've switched in 2024 to an 8051 CPU internally. Yeah, and also user input is handled differently. The SPI flash can still be dumped. That's a good thing, but it uses a different kind of encryption. That's a bad thing. So further analysis is required to actually say definitely, oh yeah, this device is secure or this is not secure anymore. Yeah, but one thing I've noticed with the new device is there may be old mistakes that were made again, like the mentioned AES ECB encryption, which is interesting. Yeah, so conclusion, an insecure product design cannot be easily fixed with a firmware security update, as we've seen here, and some security vulnerabilities are hard or even impossible to fix. Yeah, in hardware products that are already out there in the world, because either there was no update functionality intended. Here there was one intended, so you can download a Windows software and actually update the firmware without having to have a special SPI programmer like I do, so that's a good thing. But there are also other products where this is not possible. And this may lead to so-called forever bugs that may affect the product, or that affect the product until its end of life. And approving hardware, as mentioned previously, is rather meaningless if you don't have model and product names that actually have meaning, in my opinion. So recommendations for users, I have some, but it's really hard or next to impossible for users to actually see if a device is secure or not before buying them. Performing a thorough online research is always good, and if there are security issues, don't buy this product, but if there are none, you're still not sure if there are any security issues until somebody with knowledge has analyzed this kind of device. Yeah, and you should never trust or put too much faith in product certificates and marketing claims. Yeah, most probably they are wrong. And if you want to buy something or in bulk, a lot of devices, it never hurts to ask for further security testing and also what the scope of this test was. Yeah, and for manufacturers and vendors, yeah, it's a good idea to let your products be tested by a knowledgeable IT security expert before mass producing them and selling them. And concerning cryptography, it's also a good idea to hire cryptographers who know what they are doing. And what I would like to see is also having the crypto design of all of such devices being public. So no security by obscurity where somebody like me has to analyze firmware and some spy protocols. Yeah, but just have it published, and this should not affect the security of the device at all, in my opinion. And you should also make sure that your entire product, if it includes not only hardware but firmware and sometimes also software, yeah, meets the state-of-the-art standards for security. Yeah, refrain from false marketing claims, and also have good communication and public relations strategies in case of a security incident. Yeah, and now one more thing before I end. Hardware devices like those USB flash drives are used longer than you may assume. So 2 weeks ago, I had a look at a USB flash drive that was manufactured in 2007, so it was even older than the ones I analyzed in 2009 back then. And I was able to also yeah, gain unauthorized access to the encrypted data. And there are people doing data recovery, for example, law enforcement, that are still very interested in this kind of devices, even if they are old. Yeah, so here's some references, and that's it. Thank you very much for your attention.